archival record here is fabulous because Hawaii was such a fragile little kingdom. So they've documented land records, documented government process, everything was in triplicate, filed away. It's all still there.
Hawaii had a economy that was unique only unto itself. Just like every country has their own type of political economy.
The Constitution 1840. Kauikeole he's trying to keep a ship afloat with gunship diplomacy and things going on.
In 1839, the French are here. They're putting demands on him. Kamehameha is non-stop challenged throughout his entire reign by foreign powers. He knows what foreign imperialism feels like.
The kind of diplomacy that you see Hawaiians putting forth in the 19th century are survival strategies, right? No longer could we use the spear to win wars, right? Now we realize that in order to survive in what's becoming a globalized world, right, we're gonna need to learn how to be very diplomatic.
But he holds weekly seminars with the king and all of his ruling chiefs. For we're talking a year, and he wants to know how are all these other countries running their show.
So what he did was he took Francis Whalen's book, Elements of Political Economy, and he translated it with the chiefs into the Hawaiian language.
It's how do the politics and the markets and everything work in other countries.
So he was actually appropriating the elements of political economy.
They've learned about the constitutions of the United States, of the Iroquois, the way that British common law works. So they put together a piece that's uniquely Hawaiian.
And that book came to be known as No Ke Kalai Aina, and it was required reading for everybody. It was part of the school system.
He does this in 1838, 1839. By 1840, they've taken all this stuff, Hawaiianized it, and he implements a move that is so radical. He is a supreme ruler in 1839. By 1840, he's divested himself of half of his power, put it into a legislature and a judiciary. The 1840 Constitution is a Hawaiian innovation.
On November 28, 1843, the so-called Anglo-Franco Proclamation was passed by Great Britain and France, which recognized the Hawaiian Kingdom as a true, sovereign, independent nation.
Hawaii was the first non-European born nation in the world to achieve recognition of its sovereignty. That was an incredibly huge deal. 100 years before China, that's Japan, this is an incredible achievement.
To see the significance of this brown country kind of breaking the color barrier. Now it provides the political possibility that other countries who are non-white can now possess the qualities of international statehood, but more importantly, the protection that international law or international statehood provides.
It was actually one of 44 independent states recognized throughout the world. It had over 90 embassies and consulates all over the world. It was fully functioning. It was progressive.
As early as 1845, you had Hawaiian legislation that regardless of the color of your skin, you would be afforded all the rights, privileges of Hawaiian citizenship therein.
On the paperwork, when you applied for Hawaiian citizenship, it says you are loyal to the king and you agree to follow all the laws and you'll pay all the taxes. And so from this point, you will be considered a native Hawaiian. Well, doesn't that throw a wrench into modern dialogue and terminology and whatnot?
In 1852, the Hawaiian Kingdom had universal manhood suffrage in the Constitution. Any nation in the world, you could come to Hawaii, become a citizen. Chinese, Japanese could vote, own property. That's 10 years before the Civil War in America, where they're fighting over slavery.
And that transition to private property was always viewed as a foreign influence, as something that foreigners gave to us, not something that we did for ourselves. My research is on the Mahele and Hawaii's transition to private property, which happened in 1848. And the similarity with language is it has that same overarching arc and storyline of that is what has been done to us, almost making the overthrow inconsequential. What is the reason for the Mahele? The foreigners wanted it. That's what we've been told. That's the narrative we've latched onto. Nobody's asked the question, why would Kamehameha III want a Mahele? There's two main reasons for the Mahele. Vancouver, De Freycinet, all of these explorers arrive in Hawaii. Land is as productive as can be. That's when population's 400,000. By 1850, 2 years after the Mahele, by 1850, population's 80,000. That's 1/5 1 in 5 people, 20% of the people are alive. How much vacant ahupua'a do you have? So come 1850, the land's not productive. The land's not productive, Kamehameha has a problem because his job as a li'i is to make sure the lands are productive. How do I as king make the lands productive again, as they were 80 years prior? So problem number 1, depopulation. Problem number 2, threat of foreign imperialism. The British flag flew over Hawaii. In 1843, Hawaii's sovereignty is lost to Britain. That's how we get La Ho'iho'i'ea and Thomas Square, and the return, the return of sovereignty, is a result of that. If France comes into Hawaii and takes out the king, government property, all 4 million acres go to France. All private property remains. Is there any private property before 1848? No. Kamehameha III explicitly has this conversation in Privy Council. And he says, what will happen to my lands? Will they be confiscated? What happens to private lands? Now put yourself in the king's shoes. I can sit here and keep all land government, and then that's the risk. Or I can put lands into private property. And he has this entire conversation. Yet somehow in the history books, that's conversation gets back burner. And then what do we talk about? We talk about, oh yeah, the foreigner who was advising Kamehameha, he wanted private property. That's why we got it, because the foreigner wanted it. The mahele was a solution to a problem. It wasn't the problem itself.
The mahele. It's all in the newspapers the whole time. Why, how, what, who should apply, how this works. I had one of my students bring me a document. He said, I think this is my great-great-grandmother writing in to say, the konohiki of my land says I don't need to file a claim on my taro property, but what I read in the newspaper says that I should. And she gets her property. And why would she know the government intricacies of filing for land? We always understood the Maka'inana were left behind on that. Well, they weren't. There's a huge government drive to keep everybody informed. And we could second guess some of the choices. To look back and look at the internal documents, handing back that agency to show that most of that change is motivated, driven, and guided by Hawaiians. And for very good and clear reasons.
We need to realize that the mahele is ours, that we were in control and we were the ones who made that thing. Because if you realize you made that thing, you realize what that thing is, and you realize what rights it preserved to you.
Colonized. The semantics of colonization can be really undermining in that it erases sort of the heroics of a little kingdom that was uniquely progressive.
So in the Hawaiian Kingdom, you had 3 separate powers: legislative, executive, judicial. The monarch was an executive monarch, no different than the American president, chief executive. Separation of powers. Court system was established. Private ownership of land was established.
The Department of Education to our healthcare system.
Legislature enact laws regulating issues such as shipping, commerce, banking, passports.
This progressive little kingdom, if left to its own devices, was so far ahead of the curve. They had lights in the palace before they had it in the White House. They had running water and phones. I mean, they were really on the cutting edge of progress. They're modernizing. So that's what sets Hawaii apart from the other Pacific islands and from most other places. But it wasn't imposed on anyone. I mean, that's so apparent. Read the bloody narrative from the Hawaiians. This is an ongoing internal process.
As Hawaii evolved into a constitutional form of government, they began to realize that the English language, with regard to specifics with legal issues, was much more refined than the Hawaiian language.
There was a court case, and it's an interesting court case because you have a non-ethnic Hawaiian, you have a foreigner born somewhere else, making the argument that Hawaiian should be the language of interpretation. During this time, land laws, laws in general, published in both English and Hawaiian. So you have to ask yourself, why would a haole, why would a foreigner from another land want to use Hawaiian instead of his native tongue English as the language of translation? And he was trying to do that so that he could expand his rights because of the vagueness within the language. We've never had a word in our language for fee simple. We've never had a word in our language for lease. We've never had these concepts.
And that's what prompted the Hawaii Supreme Court to approach the legislature and say, I think we might have to change the law. That if there is a discrepancy between the English and the Hawaiian, the English will prevail.
And many subsequent people have looked at that and said, hey, look, there's the beginning of the imposition of English in law. Like, here's English trumping Hawaiian in law.
Now, that process is not trying to defeat a language, but rather address natives whose rights were being abused because the non-natives were using the ambiguity of the Hawaiian language on legal matters.
All of this stuff is so gray and so contextual. If you just look at what happened and you look at things on their surface, then it seems like, okay, that's the beginning of the imposition of English. More complicated than that, not that simple, not that easy.
Now, what was also happening there was English became the medium of communicating with foreigners that were coming to Hawaii. And you start to see questions of whether or not the public schools of the Hawaiian Kingdom should be English immersion schools. In fact, it was Kamehameha IV that actually proposed that. He didn't propose it because missionaries said to do it. In fact, missionaries who were part of the Hawaiian government were actually against it. They were saying, no, keep it native. But what Kamehameha IV was looking at was practicality. We need to understand the English language, not that we are outlawing the Hawaiian language. The Hawaiian language was the language of the country.
The residency here was a Hawaiian language population.
It was the and. We spoke English and Hawaiian. It was a bilingual society.
The appearance of threatening the language was not there. What I like to call this is agency. The Hawaiian population and the leadership were addressing issues and they're testing things.
This isn't mindless. They said, we recognize that never in the history has there been, a change so grand where a nation would teach its children someone else's language. And yet we recognize the value of being able to interact with the greater world and have every one of our citizens able to do that. But that's organic societal shift. It's the overthrow of the kingdom in 1893, the control of the Republic of Hawaii, and the decision to Americanize, because the goal was to actually get Hawaii brought into the United States. So that goal of Americanizing Hawaii made English be the language of instruction in the schools.
And the educational system that came in after 1896 was one which was looking really to erase any sense of who we are as a people.
After the Hawaiian Kingdom government was overthrown on January 17, 1893 by an act of war, which transformed the situation between Hawaii and the United States into a state of war, the occupation began. And that occupation, the only way they could maintain it was to begin a process of what is called denationalization.
Which meant they took control of the educational system. And so you can understand that the real purpose, of course, was to control the education of our people.
When we lose political power over our government, it means that we lose political power over our education and over all of our systems, our health systems and all these sorts of ways.
Queen's Hospital was supposed to be for Native Hawaiians at no charge. It was universal health care since 1859 when it was formed. And that was the act and process of how it happened until 1893.
They now made laws which then circumvented that old law, and now they could sell the land to themselves. That doesn't happen without the overthrow. And that's where we have to see how important being in charge is.
There was great freedom in the press. And after the overthrow, and during the Republic period especially, editors are arrested regularly. But it's for the political views, not for the language they're using.